The audience was buzzing with excitement long before the cameras officially rolled. Many of the people seated in the studio weren't just casual viewers. They were devoted fans who had followed Jelly Roll's remarkable transformation from a troubled past, marked by addiction, arrests, and prison time, to chart-topping success in the country music world. There was a sense that this appearance meant something more than a standard promotional interview. This was a man whose story resonated deeply with people who believed in second chances. Whoopi Goldberg had just wrapped up the opening segment, and the energy in the studio felt overwhelmingly positive, almost electric. There was laughter, applause, and an unspoken feeling that something special was about to happen. Jelly Roll, whose real name is Jason DeFord, sat patiently behind the scenes, adjusting his jacket and taking a deep breath. He had been looking forward to this interview for weeks, not because of the spotlight, but because of the opportunity. For him, this wasn't just about promoting a new album. It was a chance to talk about his advocacy work for criminal justice reform, to speak openly about recovery, and maybe, just maybe, to inspire someone watching at home who felt trapped by their own mistakes. Someone who thought it was too late to change. Our next guest has had quite the journey, Whoopi began, flashing her trademark warm smile directly into the camera. From spending time behind bars to topping the country music charts, please. Welcome, Jelly Roll. The studio erupted in applause. Jelly Roll walked out waving, his genuine smile instantly lighting up the room. There was no rehearsed swagger, no forced confidence. What stood out was his authenticity, the kind you simply can't fake. He looked overwhelmed in the best way, soaking in the moment as he nodded at the audience, clearly grateful just to be there. Thank you so much for having me, Jelly Roll said as he took his seat. His deep voice carried that distinctive southern drawl his millions of fans instantly recognized. I've been watching this show for years, so honestly, this is pretty surreal for me. The host smiled. The audience laughed softly. It was a strong, warm start. Sarah Haynes jumped in first, easing the conversation forward with light, welcoming questions about his music, recent collaborations, and his upcoming tour. Jelly Roll answered with humility and gratitude, repeatedly emphasizing how fortunate he felt. He spoke about long nights on the road, about writing songs that came from real pain, and about how every sold-out show still felt unbelievable to him. But when the conversation shifted toward his personal journey, his tone grew more reflective. Music saved my life, he said without hesitation. I don't say that lightly. I really believe I wouldn't be here if I hadn't found a way to put my pain into something meaningful. He talked about his daughter and how becoming a father forced him to confront the direction his life was heading. He spoke about the moment. He realized he couldn't keep blaming the world for his choices if he wanted to be present for her future. The room grew quiet as people listened closely. You know, Jelly Roll continued, leaning forward slightly, I think a lot of people look at someone like me and they write me off before they ever get to know my story. The tattoos, the past, all of that. They decide who I am before I even open my mouth. He paused, scanning the audience. But I want people to understand that we all have the capacity to change, to grow, to become better than we were yesterday. The audience was hanging on every word. This was the Jelly Roll his fans loved. The vulnerable, honest man who wasn't afraid to admit his mistakes or talk openly about how hard it was to overcome them. There was no defensiveness in his voice, no attempt to rewrite history, just accountability and hope. Alyssa Farah Griffin then asked about his work in criminal justice reform, and his eyes visibly lit up. This was clearly something he cared deeply about. He leaned in again, hands moving slightly as he spoke with growing passion. I've been where these guys are, he explained. I know what it feels like to think society has given up on you. Like you're never going to be anything more than your worst mistake. His voice softened. But that's not true. People can change. I'm living proof of that. They just need someone to believe in them and a real chance to do better. There was scattered applause, even a few nods among the hosts. For a moment, the interview felt exactly like what it was supposed to be. Uplifting, human, and meaningful. A conversation about redemption instead of punishment. About growth instead of labels. It was at that moment that Joy Behar, who had been sitting quietly with a barely concealed expression of skepticism, shifted slightly in her chair. She hadn't spoken much yet. She'd listened, arms loosely folded, her face unreadable. But the subtle change in her posture didn't go unnoticed. The atmosphere in the studio shifted almost imperceptibly, like the air before a storm. Jelly Roll finished his sentence, still focused on the importance of second chances, unaware that the tone of the conversation was about to change completely. Joy leaned forward, preparing to speak. And just like that, the warmth that had filled the studio moments earlier began to drain away, setting the stage for a confrontation no one had expected. Here is your paragraph expanded to roughly 1,000 words in strong dramatic English, keeping the confrontational tone, emotional escalation, and YouTube narration style exactly in line with your story. I know what it's like to feel like society has given up on you, Jelly Roll said, his voice steady but full of lived experience. Like you're never going to be anything more than your worst mistake. But that's not true. People can change. They just need someone to believe in them and give them a real chance. For a brief moment, the studio felt suspended in silence. Not the awkward kind, but the kind that comes when words land exactly where they're meant to. A few audience members nodded. Others wiped their eyes. The sentiment resonated deeply, especially with viewers who had walked similar paths or loved someone who had. But that moment didn't last. It was at that exact point that Joy Behar, who had been sitting quietly with a barely concealed smirk playing at the corner of her mouth, decided to pounce. Regular viewers of The View recognized the look instantly. It was the expression she wore right before delivering a remark designed not to understand, but to provoke, not to explore nuance, but to dominate the conversation. Joy leaned forward, slightly, tilting her head, her lips curling into a tight smile. Well, that's all very nice and inspirational, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. But let's be real here. The warmth drained from the room. You spent years breaking the law, Joy continued, ticking off points as if presenting a case to a jury. You were involved with drugs, you were in and out of prison, and now you're sitting here talking about second chances like you're some kind of expert on rehabilitation. The studio went dead silent. You could literally feel the energy shift as her words hung in the air. The audience froze, unsure whether to react. The other hosts exchanged quick glances, clearly sensing that something had gone wrong. This was no longer a discussion. It was an indictment. Jelly Roll's smile faded just slightly. Not dramatically, not angrily, but enough to signal that the line had been crossed. Still, he took a breath and chose restraint. He kept his posture open, his tone measured, clearly trying to take the high road. I think my experience gives me a unique perspective, he replied calmly. I'm not claiming to be an expert on anything except my own journey. But if sharing my story can help even one person avoid the mistakes I made, then it's worth it. There was a ripple of applause from the audience, tentative but supportive. Joy, however, wasn't finished. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms, wearing that self-satisfied expression she often adopted when she believed she'd landed. A particularly sharp blow. But don't you think it's a little convenient, she said, raising an eyebrow, that now that you're famous and making money, suddenly you're this reformed character? She paused, letting the implications sink in. I mean, how do we know this isn't just good PR? The camera cut to Jelly Roll just as his jaw tightened ever so slightly. His hands, which had been resting loosely in his lap, clenched into fists, for a brief moment before he consciously forced them to relax. It was a small gesture, but a revealing one. This wasn't an act. This was a man working in real time to control emotions he'd spent years learning how to manage. The other hosts looked visibly uncomfortable. Sarah Haynes glanced toward Whoopi. Alyssa Farah Griffin shifted in her seat, This was not where they'd thought the interview was headed. "Joy," Jelly Roll said, and this time there was a warning note in his voice. Not anger, but firmness. The kind that comes from someone who has been pushed one step too far. "I think you're misunderstanding what this is about," he continued. "This isn't PR. This is my life. These aren't talking points. These are real experiences that shaped who I am." His voice didn't rise. He didn't attack back. But the sincerity in his words was unmistakable. Joy scoffed lightly, waving a hand dismissively. But she was just getting started. There was that predatory gleam in her eyes, the look that suggested she smelled blood in the water and was determined to go in for the kill. "I'm just saying," she pressed on, "it's easy to talk about redemption and second chances when you're sitting pretty with a record deal and sold-out concerts." Her tone sharpened. "What about the people you hurt along the way? What about the communities that were damaged by the drug trade you were part of?" The accusation hit the room like a thunderclap. It wasn't a question. It was a judgment. A heavy one. The kind designed to strip away context, growth, and accountability in favor of moral superiority. The audience shifted uncomfortably. A few gasps were audible. Even the cameras seemed to linger longer than usual, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. The accusation hung in the air like a dark cloud. Jelly Roll didn't respond immediately. For a split second, it looked as though he might finally snap. His breathing slowed. His eyes dropped briefly to the floor before lifting again. When he spoke, his voice was lower now, controlled but charged with emotion. "You're right," he said slowly. "People were hurt. Communities were damaged. And I live with that every single day." The room was completely silent. "That's exactly why I do the work I do," he continued. "That's why I don't hide from my past. I don't pretend it didn't happen. I own it, and I spend every day trying to give back more than I ever took." His words weren't defensive. They were accountable. But reducing someone to the worst thing they've ever done, he added, looking directly at Joy now, doesn't heal communities. It just creates more broken people. The audience erupted into applause. Joy leaned back, clearly not expecting that response. For the first time since the confrontation began, she didn't interrupt. The moment had slipped out of her control. And in that instant, it became painfully clear that this wasn't a celebrity being exposed. It was a man standing his ground, refusing to let his redemption be dismissed as a publicity stunt. Jelly Rolls. Transformation wasn't just about music or fame. It was about survival, and no amount of condescension was going to take that away from him. Here is your paragraph expanded to roughly 1,000 words in intense cinematic English, preserving the explosive tone, emotional escalation, and dramatic pacing you're clearly building for narration. His breathing had changed. Anyone watching closely could see it. The slow, measured calm he had worked so hard to maintain was slipping. His shoulders squared, his jaw tightened, and behind his eyes there was now a fire, raw, unfiltered, and unmistakable. It was the look of a man who had been pushed past the point of patience. Joy Behar had crossed a line, and this time there was no stepping back from it. "You want to talk about the people I hurt?" Jelly Roll said, his voice rising, no longer carefully controlled, but vibrating with intensity. "All right, let's talk about them." The room froze. "Let's talk about how I've spent every single day since I got clean," he continued, his words coming faster now, heavier. "Trying to make amends, trying to do better, trying to use whatever platform I have to help people who are walking the same road I barely survived." He gestured to himself, his chest rising and falling. "With each breath, this isn't a marketing plan. This isn't image control. This is survival." For a brief second, it looked like Joy might pause, like she might recognize the shift in the room, the warning signs flashing right in front of her. But either she didn't see them, or she simply didn't care. "But that doesn't undo the damage, does it?" Joy shot back sharply. "That doesn't bring back the lives that were lost to overdoses. It doesn't fix the families that were destroyed. Her voice hardened. You can't just sing your way out of responsibility. That was it. That was the moment something snapped inside Jelly Roll. Years of therapy. Years of restraint. Years of learning how to breathe through anger instead of letting it consume him. All of it collapsed under the weight of Joy's relentless assault. The careful composure he had fought so hard to build cracked wide open. This wasn't just an interview anymore. This was personal. The man who had spent years trying to become better suddenly found himself face to face with someone who seemed determined to reduce his entire life to his worst sins. Someone who refused to acknowledge growth, accountability, or redemption. The explosion was instantaneous. Volcanic. Jelly Roll shot up from his chair so fast, it rolled backward with a loud scrape against the studio floor. His 6-foot frame loomed over the desk, filling the space as his voice thundered across the studio with a force that made everyone jump. "Are you kidding me right now?" he roared. His southern accent thickened as emotion took over, each word hitting like a hammer. "You think I don't carry that weight every single day?" he shouted. "You think I don't know exactly what I've done? Who I've hurt?" He pointed to his chest. "Lady, you have absolutely no idea what you're talking about." The audience gasped audibly. Some recoiled, others leaned forward, stunned. Camera operators scrambled to capture every angle as producers in the control room frantically debated whether to cut to commercial or let it play out. This was live television, and it was spiraling fast. Whoopi Goldberg looked genuinely shocked, her mouth slightly open. Sarah Haynes covered her lips with her hand, eyes wide. Alyssa Farah Griffin sat frozen in her chair, unable to look away. But Joy, astonishingly, smiled. Not nervously, not awkwardly, smugly. "There it is," Joy said, gesturing toward Jelly. "Roll like a prosecutor presenting evidence." "There's the real you." She tilted her head, eyes cold. Underneath all that redemption talk, still the same angry criminal, just with better clothes. If the studio had been silent before, it was absolutely dead now. No murmurs, no whispers, no applause, just the sound of Jelly Roll's heavy breathing as he stared down at Joy with an expression that was part fury, part disbelief, and part something far more dangerous. Then he spoke again, but this time he didn't shout. His voice dropped low, slow, controlled. A menacing growl that somehow felt more terrifying than the explosion. "That came before it. You want to see the real me?" he said quietly, leaning forward, planting both hands firmly on the desk. "The real me spent 3 years in county jail thinking about every single person I hurt." The room didn't move. The real me replayed every mistake on a concrete bunk at 2 a.m. He continued, "Every family I damaged. Every life I helped destroy." His voice cracked, but he didn't stop. "The real me has nightmares about kids who overdosed on drugs I sold. Kids whose names I'll never forget. Faces that show up in my dreams whether I want them to or not." Joy's smile finally faded. "I don't get to forget that," Jelly Roll said. "I don't get to outrun it. I don't get a clean slate. I carry it with me every day, and I use it to make damn sure I never become." That man again. Tears welled in the eyes of several audience members. "So don't you stand there and tell me I'm singing my way out of responsibility," he said, his voice shaking with restrained rage. "I live with responsibility. I wake up with it. I go to sleep with it." He straightened slightly, still towering over the desk. "And if you think anger means I haven't changed," he added, staring directly at Joy, "then you don't understand what change actually looks like." The room erupted. Applause, gasps, shouts of approval. Producers finally cut to commercial, but the damage was already done. This wasn't just a meltdown, it was a reckoning. And when the cameras eventually came back, nothing about that interview, or Joy Behar's approach, would ever look the same again.